But today, you don't have to break the law when you have power. You just change and rig the laws. So the first interview recorded a couple of days ago is with Dan Lazare, author of numerous books, including The Frozen Republic. And I am going to intro him in the recording. Stay tuned. Okay, this is a recorded interview for Organic News on Awake Radio with Dan Lazare. Lazare is the author of numerous books, including The Frozen Republic. He just wrote the piece, How Saudi Gulf Money Fuels Terror, for Consortium News, which states, in the wake of the latest terrorist outrage in Paris, the big question is not which specific group is responsible for the attack, but who is responsible for the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda in the first place. The answer that has grown increasingly clear in recent years is that it's Western leaders who have used growing portions of the Muslim world as a playground for their military games and are now crying crocodile tears over the consequences. This pattern had its beginnings in the 1980s in Afghanistan, where the Central Intelligence Agency and the Saudi royal family virtually invented modern jihadism in an effort to subject the Soviets to a Vietnam-style war in their own backyard. It was the case, too, in Iraq, which the United States and Great Britain invaded in 2003, triggering a vicious civil warfare between Shiites and Sunnis. So there are three more points that it makes in the email from the Institute for Public Accuracy, but we'll include them in the conversation. So thank you for interviewing with me, Dan Lazare.
Thanks for having me.
So now that we got the Skype audio working well, it's my voice audio that's not working so well. So yeah, what's going on with these attacks in Paris?
Well, it's an especially spectacular form of what we call blowback. Blowback really refers to the unforeseen consequences of any activity, especially some kind of intelligence skullduggery or military warfare. And what's happened is that the U.S. and its allies have essentially over the years poured in an immense amount of resources into these Muslim extremist groups. And it initially thought it could control them and use them for its own purposes. But what it's found out in recent years, in the last decade and a half, is that these groups are uncontrollable and they have a nasty habit of biting the hand that feeds them. We saw that in Lower Manhattan in 2001. And we're seeing it again today in Paris, or recently in Paris, in 2015, where ISIS and Al-Qaeda offshoot, as we know, opened up with guns on various locations in the city, killing 129 people and seriously wounding roughly 100 others. So what's happening is that the U.S. is playing with fire and is now getting burned. I think that people in the U.S. and France and other countries should be demanding an explanation from their governments, should be demanding more responsible behavior on the part of their leaders. But unfortunately, the elected officials have succeeded had more luck taming public opinion in the West than they have had taming Islamic terrorism in the East. And as a consequence, there has not been the outcry that there should be for some kind of accountability. And these political leaders are still getting away with murder. And this must stop.
I mean, I said, in the previous interview when we were starting it, that it seemed to me that the cure, or what was supposed to be the cure, has now become the disease or caught the disease.
Precisely.
Right, and there's
Yes.
no cure now. It's all just infection. Everything is infected, and instead of realizing that and like just stopping, they just keep spreading the disease more.
Absolutely. And the cure is proving worse than the disease.
And so recently, Joe Biden, I believe it was, like you mentioned him, and there's a long video of him speaking about this, and he again is just calling the acts of these terrorists and just condemning and blaming them, and taking no responsibility in creating them.
Yeah, and in October 2014, Joe Biden gave a talk at Harvard's Kennedy School before several hundred students. And Joe Biden loves to talk. And in this case, he was amazingly frank and forthcoming about what's been going on around the Syrian civil war. And what he said is, quote, "The Saudis, the Emirates, etc., were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war that they poured hundreds of millions of dollars and tens of thousands of tons of military weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad, except the people who were being supplied turned out to be al-Nusra and al-Qaeda." That's a very important statement. It contains like 3 or 4 very important facts. First was the Saudis, the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates, which is where the funding originates. They wanted to take down Assad, not because Assad is a dictator, which he in fact is, but because he's an Alawite and a member of which is a branch of Shiite Islam, and one to which the Sunni states of the Persian Gulf are deeply opposed. So they wanted to take down Assad for religious reasons, not political reasons. They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and tens of thousands of tons of military equipment, that's a lot, into anyone who would fight against Assad. And the upshot was to give new life to al-Qaeda, or al-Nusra, as the local al-Qaeda affiliate is known, and eventually to ISIS as well. So this is the problem in a nutshell. This is a very simple summing up of how we arrived at this impasse. The U.S. signed on to the sectarian war, and the sectarian war is a war of bigotry. It's a war, they're fighting Assad because he belongs to the wrong religion. And it's a brutal war fought with immense resources and has resulted in 250,000 deaths. But the U.S. has signed on to this war of bigotry. And it's causing havoc throughout the region and now in Europe as well.
And the fact that they don't admit it, the people creating it are not admitting it. I mean, if you can't change what you don't acknowledge.
Well, that's right. And the question is, why aren't they admitting it?
What are their real, of course, in interviews that I've done, like they want the oil, they want the natural resources, they want the minerals, and whatever the land has to offer is their real goals, and this terrorism is just a front.
Well, I'm sure terrorism is quite real, but yes, they're essentially there are 2 or 3 factors involved here. Oil is tremendously important to the United States and to its allies in the global economy, number 1. Number 2 is that the Persian Gulf has emerged as a increasingly important market for U.S., French, and British weaponry, high-tech weaponry, everything from jet fighters on down. The Gulf Coordination Council I'm sorry, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is the six Arab nations surrounding the Persian Gulf, is now the third largest military spender in the world. So this is a huge market for U.S., British, and French arms manufacturers. So oil comes out of the region, weapons go in. Now, the problem is that weapons never just sit there. Weapons want to be used, and they want to be used in war. So when you load up these countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, or Qatar with weapons, you are essentially pushing them in the direction of military conflict. So since March, Saudi Arabia has been conducting nightly bombing raids, for example, on Yemen, in order to defeat a Shiite force there known as the Houthis. They've killed more than 2,000 civilians, rendered more than 1 million homeless. The country's on the verge of starvation due to a naval blockade that the Saudis are conducting. And the U.S. is helping them every step of the way. They're doing it with U.S.-made weapons, which the U.S. is happily selling to them, and the U.S. is providing them with technical backup as well. They're sowing the seeds for more and more conflict, more and more refugees, and more terrorism. But no one is calling them on this, that the American people, the American working class, should be in the streets demanding their end these insane policies, but they're not doing it.
And I mean, I know you can't answer why that is. I mean, that seems to be what comes up in many talks or interviews is, right, where are the people? Why are they not outraged? I mean,
American, Western, the masses in the West are deeply depoliticized. The government wants them to be outraged, and they're slow to respond. They're very patient, they're very forbearing, but the important thing is that this will go on forever. Sooner or later, the people, the workers, will begin to notice what's going on and will take action. I'm quite confident in that.
I mean, I hope it's, sooner than later.
I hope so.
I was hoping you could, just to break things down, and maybe this will help, like if people understand sort of more simply, like what's going on. So, all of these groups, I mean, of course people like, they pretty much, I think people know like what Al-Qaeda is, but then you got, Sunni, Shia, Houthi, and things like that.
Sure. So, yeah, it's very simple.
Yeah.
Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad died in the year 632, roughly. There's some argument over the precise date, but it's roughly 632. And when he died, there was an immediate argument, as often happens, over who should succeed him. And there was a problem. Muhammad was a prophet, and therefore no one was really equipped to fill his shoes. But arguments broke out among his followers, and eventually there was a civil war effect between Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, whose name was Ali, and leaders of the Quraysh tribe, from which Muhammad came from. And eventually Ali was killed, and his forces were scattered, and the Qurayshis emerged triumphant. This is 1,400 years ago, so it would seem to be irrelevant to today's politics, but the battle is with us still. Worldwide, Shiites, the followers of Ali, account for between 10 and 20% of all Muslims. But in the countries ringing the Persian Gulf, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Oman, Shiites outnumber Sunnis by nearly 2 to 1. So the Saudis, who are arch Sunnis, feel hemmed in. And since the probably 2003 as a starting point. They've been waging a huge offensive against the Shiites. Uh, in 2011, they sent in troops to crush democratic protesters in Bahrain, a little island kingdom off the Saudi coast, which is actually majority Shiite, although the ruling family is Sunni. They have poured, they're conducting nightly air raids in Yemen in order to defeat the Houthis, a movement that is also Shiite. And since 2011, they've been pouring arms and money into the Syrian civil war, whose goal is to overthrow Bashar al-Assad because he's an Alawite, which is a kind of Shiite. So there are a huge religious war is now erupting across the entire region. It's very hard for Westerners to understand this. We haven't seen anything like this since the 16th and 17th century. But if you remember your history books, you might recall that in 1588, there's something called the Spanish Armada, which set out to conquer England. The Spanish Armada was dispatched by Philip II of Spain, who was a Catholic, and its goal was to overthrow Elizabeth of England because she was a Protestant. That event, by the way, was the immediate backdrop to the settlement by the Pilgrims and the Puritans in Massachusetts in 1620 to 1630. But the point is that we haven't seen anything like this in the West in 400 years, but we're seeing it now in the Middle East all over again, and it's a nightmare. And instead of trying to put out the flames, the U.S. has thrown itself into the conflict and is doing everything to pump things up. And it is the most wildly irresponsible action I've ever seen. This, by the way, this Syria is Obama's Iraq. He is proving himself to be a worthy successor in every sense of the term to George W. Bush. Americans thought they were getting something different, but what they're getting is, at least in terms of foreign policy, is really much the same.
And so,
sorry.
That's okay. What is to be done? I mean, there's got to be a way to hold people accountable for. I mean, war crime just doesn't even seem like a viable, term to use. It's just.
Well, and what is to be done? I mean, essentially, you have a government in the U.S. which is out of control. It's not answerable to the people. It's a plutocracy, a rule by the rich.
Yeah.
Democracy is greatly weakened. One could argue as to whether the U.S. is even a democracy at all. And what is to be done is that the people, the workers, I can refer to the workers because I see them as the real driving force of history. They must rise up and make a new government accountable to the needs of the broad masses.
Yeah.
They are not doing that, but I'm quite confident this will happen, and it'll happen sooner rather than later.
So let's move then and talk about the refugees now, because, right, of course, this country is responsible for creating them. And, there's questions as to, letting them in, or how many do you let in?
Yeah, as you said before, the medicine is proving worse than the disease. I mean, it's regime change. This crazy idea of regime change that the U.S. is pursuing in Syria, which has created a nightmare, and which has sent millions of people on the march. There's supposedly 2 million refugees in Turkey. There are probably 1 million in Lebanon. And now there are 1 million or so who are pounding on the doors of the European Union, begging, pleading, demanding to be let in. And what this is doing, entirely predictably, is playing into the hands of the ultra right, who are promoting a program of xenophobia, Islamophobia, racism, etc. So so this is a problem the U.S. has created, and now it is striking out all the basic liberal democratic values which the West supposedly holds dear, but it's now undermining those values and destroying them. It's an ugly situation. I mean, essentially, the world is hurtling towards fascism without even having a single brown shirt on the streets. It's amazing, and as long as this problem goes on, as long as these leaders behave as irresponsibly as they do, the problem will only get worse and worse.
I feel like that's exactly what people do need to do is, every day that they go to work, you're just keeping this stuff going. I understand, people have to go to work, you gotta, pay your bills or whatever, but you're not gonna have any, freedoms left if you don't make, the time, at least, take some time to, at least just address this. If you have cancer, you're not going to be like, oh, well, I got to go to work today. I don't have time to go and deal with my cancer.
Yes, but remember, the answer lies in the solution lies in the working class, and the working class works. So it's by going through work and using their economic power that change will eventually be made. But I quite agree that people have got to think, they've got to wake up, they've got to look at what's happening in the world, they've got to think very carefully through these problems, because it's really up to them to resolve. The elected officials in Washington are not going to do it for them because they are corrupt, stupid, vicious. I just don't want to slur, to hurl, slurs around. But they really are proving themselves to be woefully incompetent. I wouldn't trust these people with a family car. They're completely out of control and absolutely irresponsible.
And then what really bothers me a lot is all of the population in this country that we have in prisons.
Well, that's not an unrelated problem. America is a violent, angry place, and America likes to think that it can solve its problems through the application of brute force. It's like if you're sitting on a dinner table and your wife says something you don't like, you just give her a good sock in the jaw. But we know this is not civilized behavior. This is not democratic behavior. It's not what civilized adults do. But yet the U.S. somehow feels it can do this in law enforcement, criminal law, and in the international realm. It's just madness.
I feel in a way that they put so many basically innocent people in jail for standing up and trying to exercise their rights, like we were just kind of talking about. If more people did it, it would be better. But I kind of feel like what's going to happen is that, just like what the term terrorism, we're applying to these people in ISIS, is going to it's going to happen, more. Even maybe in this country, because they actually do. They were referring to peaceful protesters as terrorists.
Yeah. The important thing of the prison situation is that the huge prison population we have now is a direct outgrowth of the war on drugs. And the war on drugs was the direct ideological precursor of the war on terrorism. The word drug is a meaningless term. Right. It's a drug. I took a drug this morning, and I'm not taking a certain kind of pill for a swollen knee. You probably have prescription medicines that you take, or many people out there do. So drugs are a vague kind of meaningless term which is applied to certain kinds of, in this case, applied to certain kinds of illegal substances. But the war on drugs makes no sense. Its purpose is really to instill fear in the general population and to pave the way for ever more extreme and authoritarian law enforcement methods, up to and including the incarceration of 2 million people. The U.S. has the largest prison population in the world at this point. And terrorism is similarly a meaningless concept. I mean, truly, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I mean, a terrorist is anyone who deploys violence for political ends. But who doesn't? Every country with the military, deploys violence. So the nation state is, in a certain sense, a terrorist organization. By the way, I'm not trying to excuse 9/11 by any means. I think it was quite a horrendous act, and that Osama bin Laden was a thoroughly despicable individual. But the word terrorism was used in order to confuse the issue, to cover up the real origins of 9/11, and to create an authoritarian mindset in which whatever actions the Bush administration engaged in pursuit of the so-called war would be accepted by the general population. So the way was paved for the invasion of Afghanistan and the invasion of Iraq with very little debate and very little questioning. And by the way, Hillary Clinton, that great feminist hero, was among the very worst people in Congress on this issue. So yes, there's a direct connection between the war on drugs and the war on terrorism, between a prison population of, I think, 2.2 million at this point, and atrocities like 9/11 and the Paris massacre.
I think that exactly. It's as long as we have out of control people, in power. I mean, I always think of everything as like the microcosm of the macrocosm. So I think of a family system and how, I mean, the children are just going to be a reflection of the parents. And so if you have out of control people running the country, you can't be blaming the people, the people that don't have the power. You got to blame.
But the people can take power.
Right.
The class can take power.
Yeah, that's what they definitely need.
All this. Yeah. In fact, American workers don't realize and understand how much power they really have.
Absolutely. But right, I mean, I guess the people that are maybe incapable of taking power for whatever reason, I mean, they're just going to be acting out. And then being blamed rather than
And modern society has perfected means of social control through the media, the press, entertainment, etc. So the people are trained, they're conditioned to be apathetic and apolitical. But as I said, this won't go on forever, because things out there will get worse and worse. There's no doubt about it.
I feel that the people are also conditioned to never hold people in power accountable. I've seen it all my life, because I've always kind of been trying to empower people most of my life. And I mean, just recently, this is just like a sort of example. I got a parking ticket over here where I live because, I mean, the city, like, they'll just change the parking sign. Like, what used to say no parking Thursday morning, 8:30 to 10, and then they changed it to 9:30 to 11. And, how are you supposed to know? And so I was kind of calling this local community council, district, whatever, to, like, maybe complain about it or something. And, the girl on the other end of the phone was just, I always look at the parking signs, and, it's just, it's like your fault. I mean, I'm living here like for 5 years, and the sign.
We should really be very careful and not confuse a minor annoyance of a parking ticket with what's going on in Syria. I mean, look, All societies.
Yeah, her attitude though
Parking
was just.
regulations, and they'll have parking tickets, and they're going to have pissed off motorists who run afoul of the laws. And when you do, the government should be as clear as they can in setting forth parking regulations. But believe me, it's going to be as long as we have automobiles, it will be a source of irritation.
No, I was just trying to make the point that the girl on the other end of the phone was like her attitude was not about, you know, that like the system can be held accountable or that they're wrong. It's, you know, it's the public who needs to read the sign closer, even though the sign's been the same for 5 years, you know.
Well, that's true.
That was the point I was trying to make.
It's always the assumption. That's always the operating assumption. But still, the point is that, you know, that even if we had an absolute utopia, as long as we had cars, we'd have parking regulations and pissed off motorists. But the problem with Syria, where we have 250,000 deaths, is something altogether different. This is a nightmare. There are more refugees in the world today than at any time since 1945.
And slaves too. There's more and more slavery today also.
Well, true, but the amount of refugees knocking around the world has just skyrocketed. There's a galloping chaos overtaking the globe, and the people of the world, the toiling masses, must get together to try to solve their problems in a way which is beneficial to the great mass of the population.
I feel that just the way that the system is set up, like it's the agenda is just set, and it functions in this sort of one way manner, and the reason why the people don't stand up is because oh, is that an option? Like, oh, we can do that? I mean, it's like they weren't trained. Like, no one, teaches them that, yeah, you can do that. You can be empowered. It's like if the system isn't telling you that you can do it, then people don't know that they can do it. And the system isn't going to tell you that you can do it.
Well, the whole system is designed in order to keep people,
right.
Depoliticized, apathetic, and more concerned with what's happening on TV than what's happening in the world.
Right. We have to step outside of the system in order to, to cure it, and not just like.
Exactly right. We have to learn how to see the system as a whole, and that requires a perspective from outside the system. It's an old joke, and it's an old joke in philosophy. Like, does a fish know it's wet? And if you live your life in the fishbowl and have no broader perspective, then you have no idea of what your true situation is. It's only by stepping outside the fishbowl and sizing it up as a whole that you get to know what's really going on.
So I'm just going to read one thing that one of the terrorists in the Paris attacks had said while they were, attacking, is that, what are you doing in Syria? Who are you? You are going to pay for it now. Referencing the financial and military support of Sunni Islamist militias by France, the U.S. and Arab League to overthrow the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad, that resulted in the deaths of 250,000 Syrians, displaced half its population, and caused 4 million refugees to flee the bloodshed.
Well, Catherine, but be very careful. What that person is saying is what you are doing in Syria. What's ironic here is that the U.S. and that terrorists are essentially on the same side. They're both battling to overthrow Assad. Okay? So what's ironic here is that the U.S. feeds these groups, and now is very surprised, as I said before, to see these groups biting the hand that feeds them. So this terrorist is not mad at the U.S. It's killed because it's helped kill a quarter million people. He's mad at the U.S. because he's a Sunni extremist and he wishes to wage war on all other religions, Shiism, Christianity, Judaism, etc. This is a group that is at war with the world, and its enemies are all around.
Yeah, and right. I mean, and what created that, though, right?
What created that is that hundreds of billions of dollars flow into the Gulf states, which in the case of the Saudis, adhere to an extreme form of Sunni Islam called Wahhabism, and the Saudis have pumped tens of billions of dollars since the late 70s or early 80s into promulgating Wahhabism. Islam has been totally transformed. In every major Islamic center, you now have Saudi-funded mosques and schools, and Islam, Sunni Islam as a whole, has been Wahhabized, and so as a result, this movement, this tendency, has fed the creation of all kinds of ever more extreme jihadist elements.
You also refer to the 28 pages.
Oh, yeah.
Is it okay to just talk about that for how much time do you have?
I'm okay. As long as you know how much more time do you want?
Yeah, well, this will be the last point, and then we'll.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I mean, so what happened is that after 9/11, I mean, remember, the Bushes and the Saudis are deeply intertwined. I read recently that when George Bush Jr. telephoned his father to tell him that he was thinking of running for the presidency, Bush Sr. said, "Well, the first person you should visit is Bandar bin Sultan, the Saudi ambassador to the U.S."
Bandar Bush.
Bandar Bush is known. One of the most influential men in Washington, and the Saudis have worked extremely hard and have used all their financial resources to put it into cultivating support among both parties in Washington. Something like 9 or 10 major think tanks receive Saudi money. The Clinton Family Foundation receives Saudi money. Anyway, after 9/11, Bush's first priority was to protect the Saudis. He allowed 140 Saudis, including I think 28 members of the Bin Laden family, to fly out of the country in a chartered plane after minimal questioning by the FBI. He invited King Abdullah to visit him at his ranch the following April, and when a reporter tried to question the king over the fact that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi nationals, Bush cut him short. The Saudis were uncooperative with the U.S. investigation. And finally, when a joint congressional committee issued their report, a 28-page chapter dealing with the Saudi connection, the question of Saudi complicity, wound up being suppressed in its entirety. Now, Obama, when he took office, promised to make that public, but he has not done so. It still is under wraps. So the question is, what's in that report?
Exactly. I mean, they're calling for those pages to be released. They have.
It ain't happening yet. And clearly, for both the Bush administration and the Obama administration, protecting the Saudis is more important than Americans finding out what really happened on 9/11 and who was really responsible.
There's your answer.
This is outrageous.
Yeah.
3,000 people were dying.
Yeah.
Bodies were literally falling from the skies.
Yeah, it's horrible.
And those 3,000 people, they weren't warmongers. They weren't doing anything. They were the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Fathers, mothers, kids, etc. And Americans have every right to to know the full story of how and why that horror ensued. But their government, supposedly their democratic government, won't allow them to. It's hiding the information. It wants to protect an ally, which is that is ultra important as a source of oil and as a purchaser of U.S. arms. And this relationship, the Saudi-U.S. relationship, is at the heart of the problem. And the American people, the American working class, should demand explanations as to what is going on.
Thank you for saying that, and I hope people, when I play your interview on Tuesday, they're going to be hearing that. So anyway, I want to thank you, Dan Lazare, author of books including Frozen Republic, and please check out his piece, his article, How Saudi Gulf Money Fuels Terror on Consortium News. And I hope to meet you someday, Dan.
Thank you very much. It'd be very nice.
Okay, have a great day.
Same to you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, there's going to just be a slight change in the order of guests. Graham Weatherspoon, who I was going to play next, but because there's only 10 minutes, I'm trying to fit everyone in, and I was informed that there's no show after mine. So I'm going to play the full interview with Graham Weatherspoon at 8. And just to fill in the last 10 minutes before Dean Clancy at 7, I must play from Sunday. There was a demonstration for the 1-year anniversary of Tamir Rice at the Barclays Center. A few hundred people turned out and then marched from the Barclays Center to the Wyckoff houses where Nicholas Naquan Hayward killed, similar to Tamir Rice in 1994, in the stairway. And Shannon Jones, let me just find this video of Shannon Jones. Okay, as soon as we arrived at the Wyckoff houses, Shannon Jones of Why Accountability really let, I'm not sure if it was 1 or 2 cops have it, when she just caught them like laughing or smiling at the, just the event, what was going on. Shannon Jones of...
It's in your eyes for your own people. You don't come here laughing and a goddamn thing funny. One of our own people gets shot in the staircase playing with their own friends. Don't look away, because you was laughing. You was laughing. And ain't shit funny about what's happening. Now you gotta be relentlessly embarrassed. Now I'm gonna embarrass you. Like you try to intimidate us. Now you gotta be embarrassed. Don't shake your head. You should have tears in your eyes. When the cops came out here and fucked up my son to say PSA 1, after I've been out here for a year, don't turn your back. You should have tears in your eyes. It's a goddamn shame what the people of this country live They keep the community is stronger than you. The community is stronger than you. And I will relentlessly embarrass any police of color that come to these events thinking it's a patrols on Exchange Place. 4 vertical patrols on 2 Broadway.
Matter of damn drugs.
Matter of fact, go 2 vertical patrols in 1 police plaza. 4 vertical patrols in 1 police plaza. Do a vertical patrol in 1 police plaza and check your own goddamn self. Cause you rape women, you lie, you cheat on your taxes, you do insurance fraud, and you cheat on your women.
That's right.
And you cheat on your women, and you lie on your taxes, and you rape, and you steal.
Domestic violence of police officers is 50%.
You got a lot of goddamn nerve following us around. Why don't you follow yourselves around? Cause you're a goddamn joke. You're a joke. Follow your own goddamn selves around. And all of the white ones going back to Wyandanch and Lindenhurst and Dix Hill don't give a fuck about you or your children. They'll call them cotton-picking niggas when they get home. They'll call your kids cotton-picking niggas when they get home. So you don't get out here and supervise us. Supervise your goddamn selves.
So that was Shannon Jones of Why Accountability. On Sunday, Wyckoff Houses marched from the Barclays Center for the 1 year anniversary of the killing of 12-year-old Tamir Rice, and you know, she just happened to see I think it's a couple of cops that were just laughing or whatever, and yeah, it was pretty epic speech, especially when she told them to go do vertical patrols on Wall Street and 1 police plaza. So we still have 4 more minutes before Dean Clancy. So I will play another video from that day. We're actually here last night at the Grand Army Plaza.
On the pole? On the pole? Or the NYPD?
On the NYPD.
We're here tonight.
We're here tonight.
For a little brother.
For a little brother.
Tamir Rice.
Tamir Rice.
Back what?
Back what?
Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old black boy
Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old black boy.
from Cleveland, Ohio.
From Cleveland, Ohio.
He was a 7th grade student.
He was a 7th grade student.
Who liked drawing.
Who liked drawing.
And played in the drum line.
And played in the drum line.
At school.
At school.
Back two.
Back two.
On November 22nd.
On November 22nd.
2014.
2014.
Tamir was playing with a toy pistol.
Tamir was playing with a toy pistol.
At a neighborhood park.
In the neighborhood park.
A man in the park.
A man in the park.
Called 911.
Called 911.
And reported.
And reported.
A man with a gun.
A man with a gun.
The caller then said.
The caller then said.
I think he's a kid.
I think he's a kid.
And the gun is probably fake.
And the gun is probably fake.
The dispatcher.
The dispatcher.
Failed to relay this information.
Failed to relay this information.
To the police.
To the police.
Fact 3.
Fact 3.
Within 2 seconds of arriving.
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 Officer Timothy Loman.
Officer Timothy Loman.
Fired 2 shots at Tamir.
Fired 2 shots at Tamir.
The car had not even come to a stop.
The car had not even come to a stop.
When the officer began firing.
When the officer began firing.
Fact 4.
Fact 4.
Neither officer attempted to help Tamir when his 14-year-old sister ran to comfort him. The police officers tackled and handcuffed her. They placed her in the patrol car as Tamir lay bleeding to death. Fact 5. Officer Loman has not been indicted for the murder of Tamir Rice. has released three separate reports from so-called police experts calling the shooting of Tamir quote, objectively reasonable. He has admitted that these reports can bias the grand jury. Yet he continues to undermine his own case against Officer Lohman.
So that was demonstrators reading out 5 facts about the Tamir Rice case at Grand Army Plaza last night in the freezing cold. Okay, I'm waiting for Dean Clancy to appear on Skype. I can always find another video to play from last night or from Sunday at the protest for Tamir Rice. And by the way, that verdict, there's supposed to be a verdict. Of course, it takes them a whole year to do an investigation. And I believe the verdict is due, or an indictment is coming down within the next couple of days. So I will play then my interview with Graham Weatherspoon, the retired NYPD detective from Sundays. He was part of the demonstration from the Barclays Center in Brooklyn to the Wyckoff houses. Graham Weatherspoon, thank you for interviewing with me in front of the Barclays Center. It's the 1-year anniversary of the killing of Tamir Rice. And why did you want to be here today?
Well, of any nation, the greatest resource of it is its people. And of that, its children. We cannot afford to have children being killed by overreactive individuals, police officers, or anybody. I grew up in a time where we played cops and robbers on the street. And we had our silver Western-style guns, and we played games. So it's incumbent upon all police officers, and I can speak for myself because I've been in those situations. I've been in situations where there were young kids with guns, and one case where a young fella following a robbery pulled a gun on me, and the gun that he was holding was a fake gun. Now, he almost lost his life, but the fact is that I took the time to make an assessment. And he said, please don't kill me, and he dropped the weapon. No police officer is required to give up his life in the performance of his duty, although at times it is required.
Okay, that's Mr. Clancy calling. If I could, oh boy. Oh my gosh. Hold on. Hey. Oh. Okay. Oh, he's calling. He's not calling me on, okay, so he's obviously not available on Skype like original. He was calling me on, so let me call him back.
Hello, this is Dean.
Oh, hi, Dean Clancy. Thank you for joining me on Organic News on Awake Radio.
Glad to be here.
Okay, yeah, I was looking out for you on Skype.
Oh, shoot.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. Yeah, I was just.
I'm going to Skype now. Sorry.
Oh, I mean, we could stay here. That's fine. Or
If you want.
yeah, this works. I'm just going to read a little bit about you. Dean Clancy, you're a Tea Party aligned former White House and congressional aide and current partner at Adams Ald LLC, who writes on U.S. healthcare, budget, and constitutional issues. You're a former VP at Freedom Works, a former policy aide to House Majority Leader Dick Armey, and a former senior budget official in the Bush White House, 2004 to 2006. And your recent piece entitled "Conservatives Should Oppose Forced Arbitration," which states the pro-market right should join the consumer advocates in opposing pre-dispute mandatory arbitration as a violation of liberty and an infringement of the Seventh Amendment right to a civil jury trial. Can you first describe what forced arbitration is?
Sure. Forced arbitration is when you sign a contract, say with a company, and they say in a clause of that contract, when there's a dispute between you and us, it's not going to court. It has to be settled by a third-party arbitrator. That's forced arbitration in a nutshell.
And so that doesn't sound very good for the average person.
Well, it's probably okay if it's purely voluntary,
Okay.
but it usually isn't. Here's what happens. You sign a contract, it's in the fine print. You don't read the fine print. I mean, who does, right? Most of the time. You know, you download some software, it says, I accept the terms and conditions. I've never met anybody who actually reads all the terms and conditions.
I think that's the idea, is for them to make things, you know, so confusing, like the IRS codes.
Yeah, exactly. And so even if you did read it, you probably don't know what arbitration is because most people have no experience of it. Here's how it actually works. You have a dispute. The arbitration clause is invoked. The company picks the arbitrator. The company pays the arbitrator, usually. The arbitrator does not operate according to the normal rules of due process. So it's an informal process and private. They don't have to tell you why they made the decision they did. They don't publish it so that future similar cases could be compared against that decision. It's, in a sense, arbitrary. And there are terrible anecdotes, some of which were recently published in the New York Times. They did a series on this. There were stories of the arbitrator, you know, laughing and joking with the company representatives at the snack bar right before going into the conference room to do the case, or even of one arbitrator going to a baseball game with one of the company executives, like the day before one of these arbitrations. The arbitrators have an incentive to keep the companies happy because that's who pays them.
Right.
And so arbitration is often really not fair. But when you sign that arbitration clause, you probably don't know that. It sounds like it might be fair, you know, arbitrator, third party, neutral. They're not always neutral.
So it's more like bought and paid for arbitration.
Yes, exactly.
Right. I mean, you're right. There's always a kind of underlying ingredient that they neglect to put on the label.
Right.
Okay. So, right. So people. So then again, like the term agreement is not even an accurate term to use, because if people don't know what they're agreeing to, they're not really agreeing.
It's not informed in most cases. And the reason it has become so controversial is because these arbitration agreements are everywhere. Every contract you sign nowadays as a consumer is likely to have one of these clauses. And the reason for that is because Congress, in an old law, 1925, basically said the courts can no longer ignore these arbitration clauses. Before that, it was customary for judges to take it case by case, and often they would throw out the arbitration clause and say, you know what, this was not a fair agreement. These are not equal players. The company is so much more powerful. Congress said, stop that. You always enforce the agreement. And then the Supreme Court, in a couple of decisions here, just in the last few years, has basically told the states, you can't get around this. Don't be passing consumer protection laws that basically allow people to go ahead and sue and get into court anyway. And so what has happened is consumers are now being trapped in this arbitration thing. I'll give you an example from my own experience. I went to rent a car. I was in a hurry. I had to drive hundreds of miles. They made me check on a computer screen through all these little agreements. You know, you had to check boxes. I agree to this, and I'm this old, and so on. And one of the boxes was I agree to arbitration. I said, well, what happens if I don't check that box? And the guy behind the counter said, well, then you don't get the car. Well, I could have tried to go to one of the other car rental companies at that counter, but my guess is every single one of them would have had the exact same requirement because they can get away with it and the courts can't do anything about it. So forced arbitration has become a crisis for consumers. They're not getting access to the normal justice that you would get in a court of law. And as a conservative, I got excited about this because the Seventh Amendment to the Constitution guarantees a right to a civil jury trial. That right is being undermined now by these policies imposed by Congress and the Supreme Court.
The people are just losing their rights more and more and more, it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah, certainly the right to sue a company that's injured you. Remember, there's no guarantee that you're going to win. And one of the issues that's come up in this context is whether people can band together and form a class action. So let's say on your cell phone bill, you know that the company has cheated you out of, say, $10. You probably aren't going to hire a lawyer to go into court to try to recover $10. You're probably just going to lose that money unless you could get together with a whole bunch of other people who were mistreated in exactly the same way, file a class action. Well, the whole movement to basically shut down access to court has shut down those class actions as well. And so a lot of people are getting hurt in small ways, but still it's not fair, and they have no access to justice.
Exactly. I mean, the system and rules and, so-called laws are just being rigged more and more in favor of, big business and less in favor of the most vulnerable people. I mean, just to bring up the recent TPP, which like some of these corporations, they want to be able to sue governments that interfere with their future profits.
Yes,
and yet the average person can't even have one leg to stand on.
Right. Yeah, corporations have become too powerful in our country. They have too much influence in our political system and increasingly too much power over consumers. And, as a free market conservative, my feeling is we shouldn't be trying to help business. We should be trying to help consumers and individuals. And you need to have competition. You need to have force the companies to compete against each other and actually serve their customers. And you have to level the playing field. And right now on this arbitration issue, the playing field has been tilted in favor of corporations. So we need Congress to fix this problem.
I mean, it's not like the corporations need any more help.
No, they're extremely powerful because, of course, they have access to large amounts of, money, and really they have shaped the system to benefit themselves. And I'm not saying most of these people are bad people. I'm saying it's a bad system that has developed, and this will happen from time to time. And you've got to fight back and try to, break up these big companies through competition and through a level playing field.
Let me see, I'm just referring to your article. It says that currently 2 federal agencies, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, are acting under congressional authorization and are moving to ban the controversial clauses in certain kinds of contracts. Also,
Right.
a third agency, the Securities and Exchange Commission. Wow, that's pretty surprising.
Yeah, that's, of course, the watchdogs of Wall Street.
Yeah, like why would they be on board with wanting to ban these controversial clauses in favor of the average person?
Well, it's interesting. What happened is Congress has had second thoughts about the whole arbitration issue. And in 2010, as part of the Dodd-Frank law, which was designed to try to put new regulations on Wall Street, they included a couple of provisions that are now being acted on. One of those was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They were authorized to limit or ban forced arbitration clauses in consumer credit contracts, like credit card agreements. And at the same time, the Securities and Exchange Commission was authorized to ban forced arbitration clauses in broker contracts. And both of those agencies are basically controlled by the Obama administration at the moment. President Obama has appointed a majority of the commissioners in each of those agencies. So they are pursuing that policy, which was adopted by Congress. And this is a good thing. But my feeling is it doesn't go far enough. It's piecemeal. They're doing it sort of industry by industry. Ideally, Congress would go a step further and just ban forced arbitration altogether. They should certainly allow voluntary arbitration, but they should still let people decide that, you know what, before a dispute arises, I want to reserve my right to walk into a courtroom in the event of a dispute.
Right. Like how is it possible that this is even allowed in the first place? I mean, isn't the government and Congress supposed to be protecting the people and not corporations? I mean, I know they have a lot of money, but what good is a government if it can be bought?
Well, this is an eternal problem. It's always been the case that the wealthy and the powerful will try to use their power to basically control the government for their benefit. By the way, it's also true on the other side that people who have no wealth will try to use their votes to try to help themselves to kind of free money from the Treasury. And this is the eternal struggle in governments. What you want and what the American system was designed to be was one in which basically everyone's rights are protected, everyone is treated equally, and there are barriers to the rich controlling the people or the people expropriating the rich. And that's why we have this complicated system of checks and balances and so on. But that system has become corrupted. Basically, Congress has in fact fallen under the influence of corporate power. And the root cause of this particular issue is that law I mentioned earlier, the Federal Arbitration Act of 1925. Congress should just repeal that act, and then this whole arbitration problem would go away.
And yeah, talk a little bit more about the Federal Arbitration Act of 1925.
Sure. What that law says is courts, you must enforce arbitration agreements. And as I said earlier, prior to 1925, under the common law tradition, courts often would simply ignore those clauses. They did not feel that they were necessarily fair because the two parties might not be of equal bargaining power, or they might not fully understand what they've agreed to. Because remember, you're agreeing to the arbitration before a dispute has even arisen, and arbitration doesn't have the normal protections of due process. So, whereas the courts do. So the court said, look, people need to have access, especially since the Seventh Amendment says you have a right to a jury trial in a civil case. So the Arbitration Act is actually unconstitutional, in my personal opinion, but the Supreme Court has never held that. They've upheld the act, and they have made it worse through a couple of recent decisions in the last couple of years under John Roberts, the Chief Justice. And by the way, John Roberts was a corporate lawyer before he became a federal judge, and one of his big projects was trying to basically get rid of class action lawsuits and, in effect, privatize the justice system by getting everybody into arbitration.
Privatize the justice system. I mean, it's not surprising that you say that because, right, I mean, you know, healthcare is for profit, the prison system is for profit, justice system is for profit. I mean, everything literally today has become for profit, like a business, which is completely an oxymoron.
Well, it can be a problem for sure. When, you know, a public service should be provided in a way that is not trying to just benefit a private interest. And, well, as a conservative, I might not object to having a profit motive in healthcare or education or any other normal service where competition is, I think, actually a very positive thing. I do agree that in matters of justice, you can't, you know, the judges certainly can't be profit motivated, and it shouldn't be a system that's tilted towards those who have the most money.
Exactly. It says in your article, the right to a jury trial is the only right mentioned twice in the Bill of Rights. The Fifth Amendment safeguards it in criminal cases, the Seventh in civil ones. In suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved. Those last three words are sweeping. Shall be preserved. Congress has very little room to carve out exceptions, which makes the Federal Arbitration Act at best suspect, constitutionally speaking.
That's exactly right. The Constitution is really clear. Congress may not take away your right to a jury trial in a civil dispute. And there's really no wiggle room. And the Arbitration Act basically punches a hole in that and says, well, if it's an arbitration agreement, we're going to just pretend like you don't still have a constitutional right to walk into court.
I mean, it sounds like this kind of, you know, slow form of genocide. You know.
Well, yeah, that might be a strong term, but it's certainly a problem. And that's why I've gotten involved in it. And I'm kind of lonely, I have to admit, as a conservative, because most of the voices you hear on this issue are on the left. The trial lawyers, advocates, consumers advocates who tend to lean left politically. That's where you tend to see most of the commentary on this issue. I've been trying personally to get as many of my fellow conservatives and libertarians educated and interested in this because I don't really think this is a left-right issue. I think justice is justice, regardless of your partisan affiliation or ideological leanings.
I mean, right, there should, be certain things, like I like to mention, the laws of physics, for instance, that just are, and they're, the laws of physics aren't up for, but that's exactly what they do. They try to make reality and the laws of nature, up for sale or up for debate,
Right.
I mean, it's those right, like, I mean, they'll just, sell the gravity right out from under your feet.
Well, yeah, the good thing about gravity is it's a law that cannot be repealed.
We'll all be floating around. So then it goes on to say, so what's the proper remedy? Congress should repeal the Federal Arbitration Act or amend it to make pre-dispute mandatory arbitration agreements optional.
That's it. I mean, it's a very simple fix. There are bills that have been introduced in Congress to do that, and unfortunately those bills have been bottled up primarily due to opposition from the business community and the United States Chamber of Commerce, which is the big business lobby in Washington. And unfortunately, the Republicans, who control both houses of Congress at the moment, tend to be very sensitive to what the Chamber of Commerce wants. And so they have attempted to, please the Chamber on this and not go anywhere near the arbitration issue, no matter how obvious. This is, to me, this is a pretty simple issue, and it shouldn't be difficult. But members of Congress tend to be wary of it because of the opposition of the business community.
How many consumers, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot, who have been burned so far and are trying to, fight back?
Well, I don't have statistics about who has been harmed, although I'm sure it's in the thousands, hundreds of thousands perhaps, over the years. Most people don't realize they're being harmed because a dispute never arises. They only discover it when they do have an issue and they realize, wait a minute, I can't sue, I can't join a class action, I'm stuck with arbitration. That's a pretty small number. It's still, as I say, in the thousands. And it doesn't really matter how many, it's the principle of the thing. The Constitution says you have a right to a jury trial, and that's absolute. And Congress is ignoring that.
I mean, lots of constitutional rights get compromised, like, people's right to due process. I mean, that gets compromised all the time with people.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's hardly a provision of the Constitution that doesn't get violated in one way or another by some part of our government. This is just one of many problems, but I think it's one of the simpler ones and an easy one to fix.
Yeah, it says in the top right corner of your website, there are simple answers, just no easy ones. I mean, that right, exactly. I mean, simplicity is literally, and simplicity and the basics, I've always said, are the enemy of the way the system functions. And right, things are simple, but it's not easy putting them into practice because people are not used to it, which is why I've always tried to teach people about fitness. It's sooner or later everything comes down to fitness and exercise. I mean, like, literally, things need to be exercised, or that's it. I mean, they're just not going to exist.
Yep, eat your vegetables.
Yeah. There's just what are American Express versus the Italian Colors restaurant as one example. of the Supreme Court. Let me see. 20,
Yeah.
that takes it for granted that agreements are voluntary, has effectively overruled state consumer protection laws in this area.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the Supreme Court cases that I mentioned, where California had passed a law saying, we're not going to consider these agreements binding in all cases. We think people should be able to join together in a class action. And this restaurant, Italian Colors, sued AT&T because they felt they were being mistreated. And
Or was it
the Supreme Court said,
American
excuse
Express?
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, American Express. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm confusing it with another case.
Yeah, AT&T
And,
and Concepcion.
That's right. That's right. And so the Supreme Court said, well, sorry, the California law cannot protect you, Italian Colors Restaurant, because the Federal Arbitration Act trumps state law, and you signed an agreement. You got to stick with it. There's no relief for you.
Boy, whatever came of that.
Well, that was the Supreme Court's decision, and that is the governing law. So that restaurant did not get relief, and millions of people are now in a system where they cannot get relief.
It says closer to the bottom of your article that Congress has begun in 2010. It banned forced arbitration clauses outright in mortgages and real estate agreements, and authorized their probation in consumer credit contracts and broker customer contracts. Meanwhile, CMS, what is that? What is CMS?
Yeah, CMS is the Medicare agency. And what they're doing, they're trying to ban it in nursing home contracts.
Oh, so what are they going to do? Screw the old people?
Well, right now, nursing homes are often sued because the old people maybe, are injured. They're mistreated, or they don't get the care that's promised.
Right.
And so people sue. Well, the nursing homes don't want to be sued. So they have started using these forced arbitration clauses to force these cases into private arbitration. And now the Medicare agency, using the government, the authority granted by Congress, is looking at, they haven't decided yet, but they're looking at banning the forced arbitration clauses in nursing home contracts.
I mean, if they don't want to be sued, then, just deliver proper care, or, don't abuse, the seniors. I mean, I'm sure they can get sued anyway. I mean, people will always try to, but I mean, if people have a legitimate reason to sue them, I mean, like, why should people be protected when they don't deserve to be? I mean, just like, they just actually held this one officer accountable. He was arrested under murder charges for a year ago, shooting a suspect 16 times. Instead of just automatically, cops can do whatever they want and never be held accountable. I mean, so this is kind of sounding like the same thing.
Yeah, it's when people have too much power, they abuse it.
Yeah. So thank you, Dean Clancy of, you're a Adams Old LLC. Is that a law firm?
No, it's my consulting firm, policy consulting.
Okay, and your article, Conservatives Should Oppose Forced Arbitration. Thank you very much, and have a great holiday.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Have a good night.